Narrated by Kofi. It was an early morning in Obosames, a serene village nestled in the eastern highlands of Ghana. The air was fresh, and the villagers were busy preparing for their daily tasks. Among them were Kwam and his childhood friend, Kojo, both in their late 20s. They had planned a trip to a distant town for weeks, a journey that was supposed to be a mixture of business and pleasure. The village elder, Nana Ajay, was known for his wisdom and spiritual insight. He often reminded the villagers of the importance of invoking divine protection before embarking on any journey. A traveler who does not seek the gods' blessings risks wandering into misfortune, he would say. But Kwame and Kojo had grown indifferent to such traditions. They considered themselves modern men, educated and beyond the superstitions of their ancestors. As they packed their belongings into Kwame's old but reliable pickup truck, Nana Ajay approached them, clutching his wooden staff adorned with colorful beads. "My sons," Nana Ajay began, "the road is long and full of uncertainties. Have you prayed for safe passage?" Kwame chuckled and shook his head. "Nana, we appreciate your concern, but we'll be fine. We've checked the car, and the weather forecast is clear. Besides, we're late already." Kojo, leaning against the truck, added, "Yes, Nana, we live in a modern world now. The gods can rest today." The elder's eyes darkened, his voice dropping to a grave tone. "Pride often leads to folly, and folly to ruin. But it is your journey. May the ancestors guide you." Without another word, Nana Ajay turned and walked away, his staff tapping rhythmically on the dirt path. Kwame and Kojo exchanged amused glances, then climbed into the truck and drove off. The journey begins. The first leg of the trip was uneventful. The truck rumbled along dusty roads flanked by lush vegetation, the hum of the engine blending harmoniously with the symphony of chirping birds and rustling leaves. Kwame, ever the optimist, had a habit of whistling tunes from their childhood, and Kojo joined in with sporadic bursts of laughter. They joked about their younger days, reminiscing about how they used to race bicycles on these very paths, competing to see who could reach the village market first. "Remember when you fell into the ditch trying to overtake me?" Kojo teased, nudging Kwam's arm. Kwame grinned, his eyes focused on the road. "And who pulled me out?" "You with a face so red from laughing that I thought you'd explode." Their banter filled the air, lightening the mood as they discussed their plans for the future. Kojo talked about expanding his small trading business, dreaming of opening a shop in the city. Kwame, ever the adventurer, spoke of his aspirations to travel abroad and bring modern farming techniques back to their village. "One day, we'll look back at these trips and laugh at how simple things were," Kwame said, his tone hopeful. As the truck continued its journey, the lush vegetation began to change. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. The air grew cooler, carrying with it an earthy scent mixed with the faint aroma of wildflowers. This was the edge of Enkinkim, a forest that loomed large in the local lore. "They say this forest is alive," Kojo murmured, half to himself, as he gazed at the towering trees. "I've heard stories about people entering and never coming out the same." Kwame chuckled, though his grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Come on, Kojo. Those are just tales to keep kids from wandering too far." But as they approached the heart of the forest, the atmosphere shifted. The once bright sky turned overcast, gray clouds rolling in with an unnatural speed. The cheerful sounds of the forest faded, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to amplify the crunch of the tires on the dirt road. A strange heaviness settled in the air, pressing down on them like an invisible weight. "Looks like rain," Kwame remarked, turning on the windshield wipers as the first drops began to fall. The rhythmic thud of the wipers against the glass was oddly soothing, but it did little to ease their growing unease. Kojo glanced at the darkening sky, his unease palpable. "This area always gives me the creeps." Let's just keep moving. The rain intensified, transforming the dirt road into a slippery mess. The truck's tires struggled for traction, slipping and sliding as Quame carefully navigated the treacherous path. The vegetation on either side seemed to close in, the dense underbrush and towering trees casting long, sinister shadows. Visibility dropped to almost nothing as sheets of rain obscured the road ahead. "Slow down," Kojo urged, his eyes scanning the road nervously. "We don't want to end up in a ditch." Quame nodded, his attention fully on the road. But even his careful driving couldn't prepare them for what happened next. Out of nowhere, a figure darted across the road, barely visible through the downpour. Quame's reflexes kicked in, and he slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, the tires losing their grip on the muddy surface. For a heart-stopping moment, they spun out of control before coming to a halt, mere inches from the edge of the road. "What was that?" Kojo asked, his voice shaky and filled with alarm. Quame squinted through the rain, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure was gone, swallowed by the gloom of the forest. "Probably just an animal," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Let's keep going." He turned the key, expecting the familiar rumble of the engine, but nothing happened. The truck's engine sputtered and died, refusing to come back to life despite Quam's repeated attempts. Frustrated, he slammed his hands on the steering wheel. "What now?" Kojo's unease deepened. "This isn't normal, Quame. Maybe we should have listened to Nana Ajay after all." Quame shot him a glare, though it lacked its usual fire. "Don't start, Kojo. The truck probably just got wet. Give it a minute." But as the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the truck remained unresponsive. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and the oppressive silence of the forest seemed to mock their predicament. Stranded in the middle of nowhere, the reality of their situation began to sink in. "We're stuck," Kojo said, his voice barely above a whisper. Quame nodded reluctantly, his earlier confidence eroding. They were at the mercy of the forest now, and whatever secrets it chose to reveal. The encounter. As they sat in the immobile truck, a strange sound pierced the air, a haunting melody carried by the wind. It was neither human nor animal, an eerie combination of mournful wails and ethereal hums. The sound seemed to echo from everywhere, and nowhere at once, weaving through the thick curtain of rain. Each note sent a chill down their spines, as though the melody carried an ancient sorrow. "Do you hear that?" Kojo whispered, his voice barely audible over the drumming rain. His eyes darted nervously, searching for the source of the sound. Quame nodded, his bravado fading like a dissipating mist. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turning white. "It's probably just the wind," he muttered, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his unease. The melody grew louder, each note more haunting than the last, as if the forest itself was lamenting. The rain seemed to amplify the sound, turning it into an oppressive symphony that pressed down on them. The air inside the truck felt heavy, almost suffocating. Then, without warning, a figure materialized out of the downpour. An old woman stood by the roadside, her silhouette barely visible through the sheets of rain. As she stepped closer, the dim light revealed her drenched, tattered clothes clinging to her frail frame. Her hair hung in tangled strands, and her skin was ashen, almost translucent. But it was her eyes that froze Quame and Kojo in place. They glowed with an unnatural light, an eerie luminescence that seemed to pierce the soul. "Travelers," she croaked, her voice raspy and layered with an otherworldly echo. "You have entered forbidden grounds. Why do you journey without the gods' blessing?" Quame and Kojo exchanged terrified glances. Kojo's lips moved soundlessly, as if trying to form words but failing. Quame, mustering what little courage he had left, stammered, "We mean no harm. Our truck, it broke down. Can you help us?" The old woman tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing as she studied them. For a moment, she said nothing, and the silence was deafening. Then, she shook her head slowly, her movements deliberate and unsettling. "Help?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "You mock the spirits, and now you seek help? The forest remembers those who forget." Her words sent a jolt of fear through them. Kojo finally found his voice. "We didn't mean to offend anyone," he said, his tone desperate. "We didn't know." The old woman's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. "Ignorance is no shield. The spirits demand respect, not excuses." Her gaze shifted to the truck, then back to the men. "You think this rain is ordinary? You think your journey is just a coincidence? Foolish mortals." Quame's heart pounded as he struggled to process her words. "Please," he pleaded. The old woman raised a bony finger, silencing him with a single gesture. "The forest has already decided your fate," she said cryptically. "Pray it shows mercy." Before they could respond, she turned and began to walk away, her figure dissolving into the trees as though swallowed by the forest itself. The rain seemed to part for her, the sheets of water forming a veil that hid her from view. Within seconds, she was gone, leaving no trace of her presence. For a moment, neither Quam nor Kojo spoke. The only sounds were the relentless patter of rain and the lingering echoes of the haunting melody, which had faded into an unsettling silence. "Did that just happen?" Kojo finally asked, his voice trembling. Quame nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the spot where the old woman had vanished. I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice hollow. "But whatever this is, it's not normal." Kojo leaned back in his seat, his chest rising and falling as he tried to steady his breathing. "We should have listened to Nana Ajay," he muttered, his words tinged with regret. "He warned us." Quame didn't respond. His mind raced with thoughts of the old woman's glowing eyes and her ominous words. The weight of their decision to dismiss the elder's advice now felt unbearable. They were stranded, vulnerable, and at the mercy of a forest that seemed to have a will of its own. The truck offered little solace. Its metal frame felt cold and uninviting, no longer the reliable vehicle that had carried them through countless journeys. Quame tried the ignition again, his hand trembling as he turned the key, but the engine remained silent, as if the truck itself had succumbed to the forest's will. "What do we do now?" Kojo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Quame shook his head, his confidence eroding with each passing second. "We wait," he said, though he had no idea what they were waiting for. The forest seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and the rain showed no signs of letting up. They were trapped, and the weight of the old woman's warning hung heavy in the air. The descent into chaos. Desperation set in as the weight of their situation began to dawn on them entirely. Kojo and Quame, exhausted and disoriented, decided their only option was to walk. They had no choice but to move forward, hoping to stumble upon help or find a nearby village. The forest, however, was no ally. It stretched endlessly before them, its trees towering like ancient guardians, their gnarled branches twisting and curling unnaturally. It was as if the woods were alive, conscious of their every move. The leaves rustled, not in the wind, but as though whispering secrets or mocking their helplessness. The path seemed to close in with every step, drawing them deeper into the forest's heart. The hours passed with agonizing slowness. Once high and bright, the sun had long since sunk below the horizon, leaving the two men in a growing gloom. They had lost any sense of direction. The forest, which should have offered comfort in its familiar green canopy, now felt like a labyrinth, each tree a silent sentinel, blocking their way forward. As the light faded, a deep unease settled over them, an oppressive feeling that clung to the air, suffocating any sense of safety they once had. When night finally fell, it was as if the forest had swallowed all the light in the world. The darkness was thick and suffocating, pressing in on all sides. It was no ordinary night, and neither man could shake the feeling that something was wrong. Strange, distorted shadows moved at the edges of their vision, darting between the trees like phantoms, their shapes impossible to define. The sounds of the forest seemed to have changed, too. The usual calls of nocturnal creatures were absent, replaced by eerie noises that appeared to come from all around them, low growls, soft murmurs, and unsettling shrieks that echoed through the trees, bouncing off the trunks and warping the sound into something otherworldly. Kojo, unable to suppress his fear any longer, felt his heart race. "We should have listened to Nana Ajay," he muttered, his voice quivering with panic. "This isn't normal. This place, it's cursed. I know it. We're walking into something we don't understand." Quame's jaw tightened as he tried to keep his composure, though the fear gnawed at him as well. "Stop it," he snapped, more harshly than he intended, but his words were laced with a tremor of anxiety. "We'll find our way out. We have to keep going." But the forest had other plans. The night pressed on, its grip tightening around them like a vice. They pushed forward, stumbling through the dense undergrowth, when they suddenly emerged into a clearing. In the center, a fire blazed brightly, casting flickering shadows across the grass. Yet, despite the fire's warmth, the air felt unnaturally cold, as if it were coming from some deep, dark place within the earth itself. The flames danced wildly, but no one was there to tend it. Around the fire lay scattered items of clothing, tattered shirts, torn pants, and shoes, all strangely familiar. The fabrics were worn, but the pattern and style of the clothing matched exactly what Kojo and Kwam were wearing. Their eyes locked in horror. The fire, the clothes, it all felt wrong, like an omen, a message they couldn't fully comprehend. "What is this?" Kojo whispered, his voice barely audible, trembling with fear. Before Kwam could respond, a chilling, unnatural laugh rang out from the shadows. The sound was twisted, echoing through the clearing, sending shivers down their spines. Figures began to emerge from the darkness, their forms indistinct, their faces hidden beneath hoods or cloaks. But their presence was undeniable. It was as if the air itself thickened with malevolence. The figures spoke in a language neither man recognized, their voices reverberating with a power that seemed to shake the very earth beneath their feet. The words felt like thunder, booming in their chests, making the ground tremble. Kojo and Kwame froze, fear locking them in place. Whatever this was, it was far beyond anything they had imagined. The forest had turned against them, and they were no longer the hunters, but the hunted. A lesson in humility. As the figures drew closer, the air thick with the weight of their presence, Kwame and Kojo's fear peaked. Their legs trembled, and they felt an overwhelming urge to collapse. They stumbled to their knees, their faces pressed into the cold earth, desperate for mercy. The harsh, unsettling laughter from the shadows still echoed in their ears, and they realized there was no escape. "We're sorry. We didn't mean to offend the spirits," Kwame cried out, his voice cracking with terror. His words were shaky, but he knew they had crossed a line and were now paying the price. Kojo, equally frightened, echoed the apology, his hands raised in a futile gesture of surrender. "Please, we didn't know. We didn't mean to disrespect anyone." The group of figures halted, their leader stepping forward with deliberate slowness. As the figure reached the center of the clearing, a flicker of movement caught the men's eyes. The leader removed their mask, revealing the face of an old woman. Her features were sharp, her skin wrinkled with age, but her eyes, those eyes were the most unsettling part. They blazed with a fierce intensity, glowing with a fire that seemed to burn into their very souls, exposing their deepest fears and regrets. The spirits demand respect, the old woman intoned in a voice that was both powerful and cold. Your arrogance, your disregard for the ways of the ancestors led you here. You have trespassed in their domain, and now you will pay the price. You will not leave this place until you have learned humility. Her words echoed around them, bouncing off the trees and into the night. As she spoke, the figures behind her remained motionless, their faces still obscured, but their presence was suffocating, like the weight of centuries pressing down on the two men. The forest seemed to pulse with an energy they could not understand, and the very air around them became charged with an oppressive force. What followed was a night of terror and penance. The spirits did not speak again, but their tests were clear. They forced Kojo and Kwam to confront their own fears, their past mistakes, and their shortcomings. It was as if the forest itself had come alive, presenting them with visions of their guilt and regrets, times they had failed others, moments where their arrogance had hurt people, and the choices they wished they could undo. Each trial felt more brutal than the last, stripping away their pride and leaving them raw and vulnerable. By the time the first light of dawn crept into the clearing, they were broken, physically and spiritually drained. The men barely had the strength to move, their bodies aching, their minds numb with the weight of what they had endured. But when they finally opened their eyes, they found themselves back in their truck, parked at the edge of the forest. The engine roared to life without a hitch, and the sky above was clear, too clear, as if nothing had happened at all. Shaken, their minds still reeling from the horrors they had faced, Kojo and Kwame exchanged not a word. There were no explanations, no attempts to make sense of the night. They drove back to Obuzomaz in silence, the road ahead stretching out before them. But their souls forever marked by the spirit's judgment. The return. Upon their return to Obuzomaz, the weight of their experience hung heavy on Kwam and Kojo. The trauma of the forest, the spirits, and their humiliating penance still fresh in their minds. They rushed to Nana Ajai's home. As soon as they entered, they fell to their knees, overwhelmed by guilt and a newfound reverence. "Forgive us, Nana. We were foolish," Kwame said, his voice thick with emotion, as tears welled in his eyes. The pride he once held had been shattered by the harsh lesson he had learned in the woods. Nana Ajay, who had known the ways of the ancestors and understood the gravity of the situation, looked at them with calm but knowing eyes. Without hesitation, he nodded, a small sigh escaping his lips. "The gods are merciful to those who repent," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of wisdom passed down through generations. "But remember this lesson: well honor the traditions of your people. Disrespecting the spirits is a danger, not just to yourselves, but to the harmony of the world around you." Kwame and Kojo nodded fervently, their hearts heavy with gratitude and remorse. They knew the path forward would be one of humility and respect. From that day on, they became staunch advocates for the customs of Obuzomaz, sharing their harrowing story with others as a warning. The legend of the two travelers who refused to pray before their journey became a part of the village's oral history, a powerful reminder that respect for the unseen forces of the world is not just tradition, it is a necessity for survival.